I want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for having this, and I want to thank all my colleagues who are before me, each and every one of you. I've had discussions with, very encouraging discussions with, around these issues. You said very specifically, and I want to honor that, that the time for lamentations is past, the time for legislation is upon us. And I want to apologize if it seems that I'm going off of that directive, but I will end up right there. This is a very, very personal issue for me, this evolution of the United States towards its ideals. Children from Newark, New Jersey to Oakland, California stand up every day and say the Pledge of Allegiance that we are a nation with liberty and justice for all. But these last few weeks, we've seen tens of thousands of Americans taking to the streets in anguish and rage and frustration. And I agree with Senator Cornyn that it is too early in many ways to draw conclusions when there's federal investigation still going on many of those issues. And I appreciate the sensibility of his remarks. But please understand that the anguish that folks are feeling on the streets, the anguish that has penetrated this body and has had me pulled aside by Senate pages and many people who we walk by in this body who do the dignified, important work, yet menial work, who've asked me, please do something about this. What is that this they are talking about? I, as many of you know, was raised in a community which my family in 1969, as the year of my birth, was the first black family to integrate this area. My classmates and teammates were all white growing up. My dearest and closest friends now, I feel blessed and privileged that I have people who are like blood to me of all different backgrounds. But I know growing up, our experiences as our parents talked to us about police officers, talked to us about behavior, there was dramatic differences between the exhortations of black parents, Latino parents, and white parents. I remember distinctly my parents lecturing me with anger in their voice that I did not have the margin of error when it comes to experimenting with drugs or other behaviors that others have. And what I want to do right now is put this in context of what you called us to talk about, which is legislation, and put it to a context to a horrible history in our country, that history of bias that we are desperately trying to work our way out of. In my lifetime, we have seen something happen that is remarkable on the planet Earth, which is the explosion of the American prison system, to the point now where America has 5% of the globe's population, but 25% of the world's, of humanity's imprisoned people. And by God, we do not have a country that has more criminals, more criminality, more crime-intent people than China or Russia or India. And that explosion of criminality has made us see in the last 30 years an 800% increase in the federal prison population. Half of those prisoners at the federal level and the overwhelming majority on the national level are nonviolent offenders. Nonviolent, not picking up guns, not beating people in the streets, not assault. We as Americans, unlike any other country, bear the burden of spending $250 billion carrying this system. And the point that is felt in the anguish of staff I talk to here in the Senate and people protesting is not the specifics necessarily of cases, but of the knowledge that we all have, that none of my colleagues, Republican or Democrats, have denied to me, that this system is woefully biased against minorities in our country. The data screams that we all have access to and that we all know. That there's no difference, for example, in marijuana usage between blacks and whites in this country. None whatsoever. The last 3 presidents of the United States admitted to using marijuana, and I say for the record, one said he did not inhale. But yet, an African American is about 3.7 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana usage than someone that is white. That's a fact. We know we have a criminal justice system that has unconscionable outcomes that do not reflect the highest values that children of every ilk pledge allegiance to, values that we swear oaths to, that we should have what that building across the way says, powerfully written in stone, equal justice under law. And what do I mean by some of these things that jump up and call to the conscience of this country? We have a nation where African Americans make up 13% of the US population, but 40% of the imprisoned population. In my state, it's 13% and 60+% of the prison population. Nonviolent offenses. That according to the 2012 report for the US Sentencing Commission, between 2007 and 2009, drug sentences for African Americans, men, were 13.1% longer. That we know that Latino youth today, by the age of 23, 44% of Latino youth will be arrested. 44%. Many of them, most of them, for nonviolent offenses. We know the sad reality for African American men. 1 in 3 African American males born today can expect to be incarcerated at some point unless we make a change. And when you hear about police violence, trust me, I was a mayor of a great American city. It was challenging and complicated in the constant battle against crime to keep my community safe. These are nuanced issues. We struggled with them in Newark. But we know that right now, there are 6.5 million people, whites, arrested against about 2.6 million African Americans arrested in a year. But ProPublica, and that means blacks and whites, violent crime, nonviolent crime. 6.5 versus 2.6, white to black. But now someone who's African American, according to data quoted by my Republican colleague Rand Paul in Time magazine, are 21 more times more likely to be shot dead by a police officer. African Americans, 21 more times more likely to be shot dead by a police officer than someone white. And so I anguish over this fact that my country has been evolving through the dedicated, determined acts of black and white, through slavery, through Jim Crow, but I find myself a senator at a time that we have this ironic reality that there are more African Americans now in prison under criminal supervision, prison, jail, probation, parole, than all the slaves in 1850. And so this is what sears into me as a painful reality, because we as a body, Congress has the power to change this. And the people, the elected leadership that's showing this most clearly is not coming from the federal level, it's actually coming from the states. And remarkably, refreshingly, it's coming from red states. Red state governors with their legislators are passing legislation that this body should be passing, that is showing clearly that you can deal with this over-incarceration problem through common sense, bipartisan legislation. The one example I'll give as I lead to my close is Georgia. Governor Nathan Deal, he's cut spending on prisons, reduced penalties for nonviolent offenses. And the results of his common sense reforms has been a dramatic reduction in the prison population, and guess what? A 20% reduction over 5 years in the number of incarcerated African American men in their state. A 20% reduction. And so we can say what we want about the details of Staten Island or Ferguson, but there's a larger issue going on that is anguishing their heart from young people working in this institution to cities and neighborhoods and towns all over our country. And the question is, enough of the lamentation, when will there be legislation? And so I conclude with that call. It's a call that has rang through the ages of our nation, that we have something so precious. This week, Jews all across our country will be reading a portion of the Torah that has a section with these words that are written and inscribed from the Torah on the very site that Martin Luther King was killed. I had the privilege recently of watching the movie Selma and seeing blacks and whites joining hand in hand, Latinos and other Americans, in this ideal of America that these issues are not black or white. They are about justice. They are about America. That people of good conscience, when there's clear and patent treatment being given to one body of Americans, not to another, that there's a call to act. It is this idea and this dream, and written on that place in Memphis, Tennessee, on the site that one of our great Americans, not great black Americans, one of our great Americans died, is the words from the Torah that call upon us now. Simply these: here cometh the dreamer, let us slay him and see what becomes of his dreams. There has been enough death in this country. There has been enough over-incarceration. It is time now that we make the dream real, and we, through our legislative efforts, as illustrated by state after state, can now follow suit, reduce our prison populations, lower crime, save taxpayers money, and more effectively herald the highest ideals of our country. Thank you.